No two people's lives unfold the same way. Our life experiences, good and difficult, impact and shape each of us in unique ways. Every experience has a lesson to teach us if we learn to embrace it. By exploring their personal challenges, the chapter contributors to Good to the Last Drop have found ways to help and guide others through their experiences. Every human must learn to live with grief or loss. It happens to us all. Good to the Last Drop could be the book you never knew you needed to read, just when you needed to read it most. Explore ways to find personal meaning and your way forward through life's many challenges and experiences as you explore Good to the Last Drop. Now, available on Amazon. Get your copy today.
My esteemed contributors to Good to the Last Drop, I want each of you to know how deeply appreciative I am for your wonderful, inspiring, heartfelt chapter contributions to Good to the Last Drop, embracing your life's third chapter. It feels like I'm welcoming family today to greet Julie, Ryan, Phyllis, Jeff, and Brian, because I've so thoroughly enjoyed interviewing each of you on Grief and Rebirth podcast. You're each so very special and remarkable. I'm truly honored to know you, and thank you once again. Julie Lazar-Reskakis, when I received your email telling me how my interview with Cherokee Ilse changed your life, I cried tears of joy, and I could not be more delighted to greet you here today. Thank you for your wonderful chapter. And dear friend Betty and beloved brother Alan, I love your chapters, and I love you. And by the way, a great sidebar, it was Phyllis Okon who channeled the guidance I received to create this book. So heartfelt thanks to you, Phyllis. Thank you, Spirit. And thanks to each of you for joining me on this heaven-sent journey we are sharing. And now, a huge heartfelt welcome to the cherished members of my popular international award-winning Grief and Rebirth podcast audience. What a pleasure this is to introduce the wonderful contributors and their riveting chapters to Good to the Last Drop, embracing life's third chapter to each of you. It is such a joy to have you here. If you missed our introduction to Part 1, Grief and Rebirth, you can catch up on YouTube or listen on Apple or Spotify. We touch on compelling stories from several authors, me included, whose lives were rocked to the core and transformed by life-changing events. In the second segment, called Embracing Life, Reinvention and New Purpose, which we are focusing on today, you'll read about the various ways these authors came to find new, renewed purpose or added clarity in their lives, whether from personal loss and trauma, epiphany, or the recognition of the need for support for those experiencing loss. It is my honor to have each of the esteemed Embracing Life, Reinvention, and New Purpose segment contributors introduce him or herself to you, share a third chapter tip or reflection learned to date, and read an inspiring excerpt from his or her chapter to you. So now it is time to turn this fun, fab, good book launch over to my incredibly wonderful and highly competent assistant, J. Dean Stout Williams. Her friendship and professionalism mean the world to me as we continue to navigate the podcast, book, and social media landscape from our respective bases in New Jersey and Barletta, Italy. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you. Okay, so to kick off our contributor spotlight, we're going to have Judy Ryan presenting her chapter, Journey Beyond, Exploring the Mysteries of Life, Death, and Creation.
I am so honored to be here. My goodness, I was so honored to be with all of you, all of my colleagues here, and to be asked to contribute to the book. And when Irene and I were talking about it, I heard, well, it's for people who are kind of in the third or fourth chapter of their lives, and what are you going to do with it? And how was there a catalyst that caused you to kind of shift gears? And certainly there was with me. Irene, you're the queen of shifting gears in midlife or phase 3 or 4, or whatever you want to call it. And mine was, I'm a businesswoman and an inventor. I have founded 9 companies in 5 industries. I'm an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world. And so I'm a businesswoman, and I learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness now, is what I like to say. So that means we can talk with deceased loved ones, scan animals, scan people medically, do past lives. I mean, once we connect with spirit, we can do it all. And I was interested in learning about this woo-woo stuff, spiritual stuff 30 years ago. And I took some classes for 6 years and paid the equivalent of what I would have spent on an MD or a PhD to learn how to do this. And people were saying to me, well, what are you going to do with it? I'd say, I don't know. And they'd say, well, why are you doing this? And I'd say, I have no idea. I'm just being led to do it. And so here I am all these years later, sold my surgical device manufacturing company in 2015 and thought, okay, now what? And so I've been in this spiritual space ever since. You never know where spirit's leading you. You never know what your next chapter is going to be. I think we're all led, and we get to the point where we think, oh, I can't do that because of a number of reasons, and we don't follow where we're led. And really the key, and Irene, again, you're right in there, the key is to take action when you're being led to do something along these lines, because you just have no idea how amazing the experience is going to be and how it's going to unfold for you. And I find that at my age, in my mid-60s, that it's almost like I'm more excited, I'm more energized, I'm more willing to try new things and explore things and learn things and see what's happening, because I know my time here on earth is limited, but I have never had more fun in my whole life. And it's always an adventure every day.
That's so wonderful. What a third chapter you're having. Have you got an excerpt for us?
Our journey doesn't end with death. It merely takes on a new form. Just because someone reaches a certain age doesn't signify the cessation of their creativity. Instead, it signifies a transition into something new and different, customized to the unique stage of life they find themselves in. And I'm a great example of that.
Up next, we have Judy Lazar-Reskakis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Lazar-Reskakis, and I live in Bergen County, New Jersey, actually not far from Irene. We're sort of in the same part of the world. So, yes, the title of my chapter is My Journey from Audiologist to Perinatal Bereavement Specialist, and a few things in between. Actually, there were many things in between that led me down this new path, but I don't think any of them were a coincidence. First of all, let me say that I have suffered from imposter syndrome my entire life. From the death of my mother when I was 3 years old, followed by 2 abusive and wicked stepmothers, a cancer diagnosis, and other trauma. I never felt that I was good enough, smart enough, attractive enough, etc. As I sit here with you all today, amazing and inspirational people who have discovered a new chapter in their lives, I feel like I am enough. When I looked up the word retirement in the dictionary, one of the meanings I came across from the Cambridge Dictionary was, and I quote, the act of leaving your job and stopping working, usually because you are old, end quote. Safe to say we have debunked that definition. So after I retired from 35 years working as an audiologist in New York City, I became interested in working with people at the end of their lives. In fact, the nursing home where I spent a great deal of time in my career, opened up a hospice unit, a 10-bed freestanding hospice unit. There wasn't much call for an audiologist on a hospice unit. As you can imagine, problems with their hearing was really one of a minor consideration in terms of everything else that would be going on in a hospice. But a seed was planted. And even though I was not called to do many consults on that unit, I would often just go up in my free time and talk to the staff just to find out what hospice and what the philosophy was all about. So when I did retire, as I said, I became interested in sort of pursuing that, working with people at the end of their lives. And I must say I had an equal amount of terror and curiosity about death and dying. So I enrolled in a course and I became a certified end-of-life doula. And I began to volunteer in a hospice. That was 8 years ago, and I still do that volunteer work today. Through many other twists and turns, I ended up becoming a certified grief educator with David Kessler in his inaugural grief educating class. And subsequently, I became a birth doula. Many years ago, almost 38 years ago, in fact, I suffered what to me was a devastating pregnancy loss. And during that time, there was very little support for mothers and their families suffering the loss of a baby at any gestational age. This grief stayed buried within me. One day, completely spontaneously, or was it? I was listening to Irene's Grief and Rebirth podcast, and the guest that day was Cherokee Isles. Cherokee is the foremost pioneer in this field of perinatal bereavement. In fact, she began writing her first book, Empty Arms, while she was still in the hospital bed after her third loss. This is a book we still use today in this perinatal bereavement field. It was as if Cherokee was sitting next to me in my car as I drove and listened to the podcast. At the end, she actually gave out her cell phone number, and I called her. I knew in my heart that this would be my next chapter. After many months of training with Cherokee, both online and in person, I became the first and still only person certified as a perinatal bereavement specialist in the state of New Jersey with Cherokee's Baby Loss Advisors Organization. 2 years ago, I became the perinatal bereavement specialist at Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, New Jersey. And I am now proud to serve on 2 nonprofit advisory boards in the community, supporting women and their families through miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant death. I wrote a letter to Irene telling her how her podcast changed the entire direction of my life. Here's just a very quick 2-sentence excerpt from my chapter. I had my own history of pregnancy loss many years earlier and did not receive the support I so desperately needed at that time. I wanted to change that narrative for other families. In conclusion, thank you to Irene Weinberg and Cherokee Isles for guiding me on a path I never otherwise would have taken. I am eternally grateful to both of these women and honored to do this work.
I could not be more humbled and honored.
Now we'd like to invite Phyllis Okon to present her chapter, Mother of Reinvention.
Well, my kids have a fond way of referring to me as the mother of reinvention. I've had many incarnations in life. And one of the first things, I started out as a teacher for about an hour till I left that. My husband needed help running his business. He was an immigrant and he needed help. He needed an English speaker. So I said, okay. So I left the business and the deal was I wanted to start a family. And we started our business and we ended up, and the reason why I'm telling this is because it's pertinent. We ended up heavily into Hollywood. We own a car service and we just fell into a thing that they needed help in LA. we became the premier service in Hollywood. Very exciting stuff. I spoke on the phone with actors, writers, directors, the people movers. Every movie for the past 50 years, we've been involved in one way or another. But something happened in the beginning. We were embraced and everybody loved us. It's young mom in the house. I sat with yellow pages, cold calling. A lot of those accounts are with us today. But something happened when I turned 40. I discovered I became invisible. I wasn't invited to the table. I'd show up and these young publicists would look past me, and all the things that used to work to get business all of a sudden didn't work. They wanted new people. They wanted young people. They didn't want me. And I was staggered. I was horrified. Just so worked out, I kind of floundered with this for a little while. And my kids started to have babies. And when my son had a boy, a little boy, I was the light of his life. He adored me. And all of a sudden, one day, he was bored with me. And my son turned around and said, "Ma, you have to reinvent yourself to match what he wants." And then I realized I had to reinvent myself for everything. So I started reinventing myself. And of course, life breathes in and breathes out. You have highs, you have lows. It's not a merry-go-round. I like what Julie said. Everything in your life prepares you for the things that you end up doing. Everything in life, it's kind of like this kind of ride. And as you accumulate, you put things in your shopping cart of life, and all of a sudden you find out that you're going to use it later on. And she's right, because we're surrounded by signs. And sometimes we're just blind to those signs. So when I lost my mom, I became an author. I was so sad. My kids were trying to pull me out of I never had been depressed in my life. My kids tried to pull me out of my depression. And they said, write a book. It was a lifelong dream. So I started writing, and 83 books later, I became a best-selling author, award-winning author, and it opened up a whole new world. But I didn't stop being involved in the business. I was still running the business and doing that. Well, my husband developed lung cancer alongside my mother, who was CFO of our company. He was the CEO. They developed lung cancer within 3 months of each other. That was a gut punch. I knew she was terminal. I had to make it the best 2 years she could have. She was my best friend. And then with my husband, who was my other best friend, I had been with him since I was 16. We didn't know if he was going to live or die. Well, he lived 15 years, which was a miracle, but it was a miserable 15 years because this was a person who could not accept that he wasn't going here. He was only going to here. And I had to reinvent myself again. I became a nurse. I became the cheerleader. I took over the business without allowing him to feel that he was diminished. Well, when he passed, I missed him. I had been with him every waking moment. So I was going from medium to try to get messages. I didn't see the signs around me. I was desperate. And then COVID happened. So I found myself at home. I started taking lessons to be in media. Never occurred to me that, it was more like, let's see. All the meetings were telling me you can do this yourself. I kind of didn't believe them. But once you see it, you don't unsee it. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I was in a class of 86 people, and I was the only one that the teacher endorsed. Every class that I took, I ended up being endorsed by the teachers. I took 20, 30 classes. My kids had a podcast, and they invited me on. And they didn't prepare me that they were going to have guests on that I was going to read. And I was a baby medium. Imagine my surprise when I was able to do it. It was just as surprising for me as it was for my sons. Reinvention again. The next day, they set up a shingle, and I averaged between 20 to 40 readings a month. And a good friend, a person who put Irene in my path, said, "You have to teach." And I said, "I can't teach this. This is something you have to come to realization on your own." And she said, "Try it." So now I'm teaching 3 classes a week. I have over 40 students. I'm starting a new class. I have a Patreon. Reinvention once again. And you become, sometimes I feel a little bit like Mother Goose. All the ducklings are coming underneath my feathers. And I can't believe how age doesn't matter now, that I've become relevant again. And it's just delightful to feel that you have a purpose. But unlike Julie, I kept my old job. So while they're texting me to tell me what's going on over there, I'm here. And somehow I like it. Do you remember the Ed Sullivan Show? Or are all of you old enough to? You remember that guy who had the plates going? Da, 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 da. That's what life is like. And when the younger people say to me, I can't do that, I go, yes, you can. Try. If I can do it, I can't even see anymore. Can't see the chin hairs to pluck them. I mean, isn't that convenient? They take away your sight so you don't see all what's going on with you, right? So if I can do it, you can do it. And I love the discovery when they're in the class and all of a sudden they get 5 out of 5 and they go, how did I do that? And I go, you just saw the signs. Again, like it was Julie, right? It was like Julie said, you just saw the signs and you put them in your shopping cart. So I have one son, I like to think of him as a stonehead. Nothing goes in. He's very concrete. So he says, I miss Daddy. I said, ask him for signs. Ask him for signs. So 3 days in a row, he's calling me up. He says, you can't believe this. I asked him for a sign and I opened my phone and the first thing on my phone was this. Or I turned on the TV and it was that. And it was a sign. And my other son was so intrigued that if I could do it, he could do it. He's taking the course and now he's reading people. So what I've learned is we're not extraordinary. And I tell people I'm not gifted, but I'm a gifted medium. In other words, I know how to read the signs and anybody can do that. So reinvention is the spice of life. And it was interesting. I had a very famous tarot reader was reading my tarot cards. And, I had gone gray during COVID and I decided I'm not dyeing my hair again. It was too painful for me to watch my hair grow out. It was just too painful. And so I said, I'm not going to, and he lays out I guess he figured I wasn't a spring chicken. I don't know how he figured that out, but he's laying out my cards and he's looking at me and he's looking at my cards and he's looking at me. He says, something's wrong. I said, well, what's wrong? I figured he's going to tell me something terrible. And he says, these cards indicate you have so much coming on. You're not retiring. I said, who said anything about retiring? Just because I have gray hair doesn't mean I'm going to retire. What's new? We opened in London last year. That was new with my day job. I'm leaving next week. We're going to LA and Vegas within 36 hours. I'm visiting different offices. What else can we do? I published a book 3 months ago on affirmations. I have to look because with 83, I can't remember all the titles. So the point is, life begins every time you want it to. It's all about choice. And I think I think we eat the old people in this country. We stopped respecting the value of age. My grandmother lived with us until I got married. And I moved so I would be at 2 or 3 blocks away because I called her all the time. What do I do? The baby has a rash. What do I do? The meal isn't working. What do I do? I'm having a problem with my husband. She had such invaluable advice. I feel richer for it. I live a mile from both sets of my grandchildren, and they come to me when they can't communicate with their parents. Don't throw away the old people. We got a wealth of advice. And we don't talk nonsense.
Please read an excerpt. And I think what you just said is absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Phyllis. And it's so true for the 3rd chapter that we all reinvent ourselves and keep going on.
And the heck with people who don't support us. You don't need support from other people. If they're not going to support what you're doing, don't worry about it. Do it for yourself.
Or if they have you in their box and they can't accept it, that you're not in that box where you're supposed to fit. Bravo.
That's what I have a 4-letter expression for that one. But okay. Rediscovery, stepping outside my comfort zone and learning that my horizon is unlimited is inspiring. You're never too old to try something new. You might even see it through different eyes. Life's experiences make us stronger, smarter, and more perceptive. I'll be 70 in this year when the book is published. The big number is looming, but I don't feel it. I post content daily to social media, sharing what I've learned. I write blogs, do gallery events, and something I never thought I'd do again. I've come full circle. I'm teaching again, my own course. I have over 40 students. I wrote a book about it. Of course I did.
That's great. Thank you, Phyllis.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you very much. So up next, presenting her chapter, Cosmic Dreamer, we have Betty Jampel.
Thank you. So first of all, Irene, I want to say a big thank you to you for all these years of friendship and guidance and just pure love. So thank you for inviting me into this project for you. I'm forever grateful to have met you all those years ago at that search group for grief and rebirth. So I just have to say that I have to put that out. So I live in New Jersey. I live in the same town as Irene. I have been in New Jersey since 2000. But my life started out in Brazil. I was born in Brazil to Holocaust survivor parents and came to the U.S. When I was 3 years old in the early 1960s. And I would say that that my birth into the family that I've come into has been the trajectory for my life in exploring grief and my own rebirth. So I always like to start there. And I tell people when they're exploring their life and they're wanting to make changes, start there. See where you came into and why did you come into that space? And, what have been the challenges and what are the life lessons that you have to learn from that? So that's really, I always like to honor my ancestry and my beginnings because that's where I've learned the most. So I grew up in Brooklyn. I've been a social worker for most of my adult life. I've never really done anything else. I went to graduates. Got my bachelor's, and then pretty much went into graduate school and became a social worker. And it's no accident that I became a social worker. Growing up, I was always listening to stories, telling stories. It's really always been my interest. I just always picked up people's stories. People would tell me, I'd be on the New York City subway and people would start talking to me and telling me things and I didn't know what it was about. But when I went to social work school and learned that becoming a therapist was really all about listening to people's stories, I got it, So I have been a social worker. I have worked on psychiatric units. I've worked primarily in behavioral health. So have heard a lot of what people might think are crazy things. And I've worked in in all capacities as an administrator, supervisor, and all of that has really kind of created who I was. But it was really in my own personal private practice that I really began my growth. I started out as a very clinical social worker, but really through the years of my own training, have really been involved and trained in holistic modalities. So it started out with, hypnotherapy, past life regression, regression therapy with Brian Weiss many years ago. I trained with him. So I really started delving into more uncommon types of work and started to integrate that into my own work with folks, but also integrating it into my own personal life and really learning. I always say that my professional is my personal is my professional, because I come to my work as myself. You know, if I have not done my own work, it's very hard to help others with their work. So that had been my trajectory for a very long time. And then my mother died, my parents died, and then my brother died. And my brother had been a very pivotal person in my life. And he died fairly young, I would say. And it was a great, great loss at the time. And he was in hospice work. And I had been a hospice intern in my first internship in social work school. So when I had to, so after he died, I actually left my administrative job and decided I needed to have a day job. I always had a private practice. And I decided, well, you know, I really want to do hospice work. And for almost 10 years now, I've been doing end of life work. And what I have learned has been phenomenal. I mean, I cannot tell you the privilege it's been to sit at patients' bedsides and listen to their stories and support their families. And it was through the stories that I was really blessed to hear about what they were experiencing at end of life, really triggered in me this fascination with non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I always had a fascination with that, because even as a kid, I had very kind of otherworldly kind of experiences, but I didn't really understand it. And there were other things that happened to me throughout my life with the birth of my children that threw me into these other realms, but I didn't really start to understand it until I worked with people at end of life and realized what was going on, and then began to take more trainings and more interest in those areas. And 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, I became a psychedelic facilitator for a psilocybin study. And it was through the watching and participating with these participants, what they were able to experience on the psychedelic medicines, that I became a psychonaut. I just really started to delve into these medicines myself and have had life-altering experiences. And everything had really come together for me in terms of why I was doing my end-of-life work, why I was there in those spaces with these, with these patients, listening to their stories, and and then doing my own work with these beautiful, beautiful medicines, all of which have spirit behind them. That's the message I always get. It's not just a compound. It's not just a plant. There's a spirit behind it. And if you use it wisely with great intention, the lessons are innumerable. So I have started I'm trained in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, so I've been doing that. I've been training to do MDMA and psilocybin assisted therapy. And when that becomes legal, I'll be, working with that, and really have deep interest in doing palliative work, end-of-life work with some of these medicines to help people be able to cross over in a more conscious way, so that they are not frightened, that they are living every moment that they do have with great integrity and with great purpose, and to help their families really be able to deal with their crossing over with as little trauma as possible, and to be able to grieve, appropriately and fully, when their loved one does pass. So that is really my passion in my life. I come to it, people say, what do you want to do when you retire? And I think it's not what I want to do. I always think of who do I want to be when I retire, and this is what I want to be, and this is the space I want to be. We come into this world our birth is the same as our death. We're coming from one realm into another, and then we leave into the next realm. And I say to everyone, pay attention to all of that. It all matters. Life is a gift. We don't know when we're going to cross over. We think, we hear doctors say it's going to be this many months or weeks. You know what? We don't know. And even for ourselves, we can go tomorrow for whatever reason. So I say live life as you would want to leave it, doing everything that you want, or at least trying to. So anyway, so thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I would like to read a little bit, a little something, okay? We in the West are not accustomed to the language of spirit and nature. We are not encouraged or validated to see and acknowledge that which is not three-dimensional and tangible to most. We tend to demonize, pathologize, and shun any reports or experiences of a non-ordinary nature. We are taught to believe that children have vivid imaginations, that dream states are imaginary, and that death is an end game. I am here to tell you that none of this is true. And this has become my passion, to educate and to create opportunities and a portal for transformational healing and growth so that generations to come are open and enlightened, willing and able to access and express higher states of consciousness to make compassionate and life-sustaining choices.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for who you are, Betty. Truly, that was wonderful.
Now we'd like to invite Jeff Rasley to present his chapter, Finding Meaning in Solitude and Community.
That was really wonderful to hear Betty talk. And in a lot of ways, it's an interesting and appropriate lead-in. I'll spend a bit more time reading than Betty did because the chapter that I've contributed is a story, and it's sort of an adventure story gone wrong, but that I think it has a worthwhile lesson in it. But so just briefly, a little bit about me. I practiced law for 30 years and was enmeshed in the oftentimes awful and sometimes joyful and rewarding legal world, and also to some extent the political world too. And it was a wonderful life, long-term marriage, 2 kids who are now grown, very successful career. But well before my legal career ended, I hit 40, and I had really sort of a classical midlife crisis experience. And there was nothing about my life, if you looked at it from the outside, that I should have, had any complaints about. But I had this sense of, but this really wasn't the life I wanted, because when I was young, I was quite an adventurer and traveled all over the world, and often on my own, and usually at a fairly low budget. And anyway, that part of my life I had let go of because I had become the head of a small law firm and had another business on the side, and I was serving on about 5 or 6 different boards, and I was coaching my kids' athletic teams, and I was just busy all the time, scheduled out all the time. And so one day I came home from the office, and my wife slapped down this brochure on the table in front of me and said, "Why don't you go do this?" And it was to join a trekking group and trek to Mount Everest base camp in Nepal. So essentially, she was telling me to go take a hike and do it on the other side of the world. And it was extraordinarily sensitive and kind of her to do that. And so I did. And I really fell in love with the Himalayas. I spent most of my life in Indiana, so not exactly a lot of background in mountaineering or mountains at all. But I fell in love with the mountains, fell in love with the people that live up in the mountains, and kept going back, became a mountaineer-led trekking and climbing group, started a foundation over there. And really, it sort of, I wouldn't say it changed my life, but a whole new pathway in life opened up that I really hadn't foreseen and has been very important to me ever since. And I'm still president of the Bassa Village Foundation. And, but I have not been back to Nepal for a few years for various reasons. But anyway, so because this will take a bit longer, I'm going to, not close, but minimize this window, and I'll read a bit just from this story. The fog had cleared enough that I could see 50 yards or so. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it set the scene. So I'm on a 14,000 foot peak in Nepal, a remote area. 14,000 feet is not a high mountain in Nepal, so not a big mountain. And I had ended up climbing it on my own, left my climbing group behind. And so I'm out on my own and I got lost. So I'm trying to find my way back to our base camp where our guides and porters and the rest of my group is. And this was supposed to be a fun adventure for the whole group, but for different reasons, it ended up being a solitary thing in which I got lost. So I'm coming down the mountainside. The fog had cleared enough that I could see 50 yards or so. 20 minutes later, the trail came to an abrupt end. A rock slide had wiped out a 100-yard stretch of the trail. Traversing a mountainside across a rock slide without a rope or a partner would be very risky. But this made no sense because our team didn't have to cross a rock slide on the trek to Pikey Peak. It must be the wrong trail. And I'm trying to find the trail that we had trekked to get to base camp and having trouble finding it. And I slid down an ice slide and had to climb down a steep rock face. And so anyway, here I am. Was it possible I did not see the correct trail in the fog as I struggled down through the rhododendron forest? There had to be another trail. I backtracked once again, but this time on the run. I also started looking for caves and shelters just in case I would have to spend the night on the mountainside. Just past the point where I'd originally found the trail, I noticed a break in the trees. Above the trail, there was a little clearing in the woods I hadn't noticed on the descent. It was a yak pasture. Yes, I remembered seeing it on the way to our campsite. Across the little pasture was another trail, and there was a booty arrow. Booty drew an arrow to mark the correct direction at every trail intersection on the trek to Pikey. I soon came to another trail intersection. I was sure I should take the upward trail, so without hesitation, I turned to the left, heading uphill. Another 20 minutes, and I was back at the pasture where I'd started. Arg, I had gone around in a circle. I needed to regain composure. For a couple minutes, I chanted the Buddhist mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. I was calm again, and I strode back down the circular trail at a steady pace. This time, I went straight in the direction Booty's arrow pointed. The sun had sunk behind a mountain to the west. I had lost sight of Ganesh, and Ganesh was our head guide. And Mike, Ganesh and Mike had started up the mountain with me, but didn't finish, and they were back in camp. Now that I was confident I was on the correct route back to our camp, the feeling of joyful pleasure in my little solitary adventure returned. I was lost, but now I was found. Night had settled on the mountain by the time I sighted lights at our campsite. I knew Ganis and the crew would be worried and upset, so I began yelling as I approached the camp. No one responded, and I didn't see anyone. I poked my head into Mike's tent. He was asleep. Ram came out of the goth he was using for a kitchen. He said that Ganis, Budi, Nurman, and Hamid were all up on the mountain looking for me. Damn. I jogged up the rocky path toward the summit of Pikey Peak, yelling and whistling. I spotted Ganis on the mountainside waving at me. Higher up the mountain, Budi acknowledged Ganis's signaling whistle. When we were all back down and gathered in the meal tent, we learned that poor Hamid had hiked all the way to the top, but had found no sign of me. It felt very good to share the warmth of our meal tent with the guys, to laugh about my execrable sense of direction, to pass around plates of dalbat, cups of hot tea, and finish off the meal with a shared bottle of Roxy, which is the local spirits. At first, I enjoyed being alone on the mountain, but when I realized I was lost, anxiety replaced enjoyment. Being back in our meal tent with my team reminded me that we humans are social beings. Sharing experience with family, friends, or within a community makes it more meaningful. So that was how the chapter piece ended. But just as a sort of a postscript, the adventure on Pikey Peak was supposed to be an enjoyable diversion during a mission trek. 3 members of the Bassa Village Foundation trekked with villagers from Bassa Village, and this was in 2010, to deliver all the materials and equipment to build a hydroelectric system for the remote village of Bassa in Nepal. So that's why we were up in the mountains. We were actually carrying all this equipment to the village. And this little mountain experience was supposed to be just a fun break from heavy labor. And so instead, it turned out to be more of an adventure than I had planned on.
Sounds like this has led you to a wonderful 3rd chapter part of your life, right?
Yeah, it really has. I went to and ended up going to Nepal 14 times, once to India. And so the travel, I had never planned on going to that part of the world, but it became kind of a second home to me. And then the meaning that I've gotten from having this relationship with this one village, and, seeing how life expectancy, because this started, quite a while ago, life expectancy in the village has risen because we brought a medical clinic. The infant mortality rate was 75%. Now it's down to 25%. And all of the improvements in the quality of life in the village have come through requests from the villagers. So we made a pact at the very beginning with our sister foundation in Nepal that we would never impose our expectations or our values on the village, because we wanted to respect its beautiful and unique local culture. And so the infrastructure development we've done has all come at the villagers' choice, and they have done all of the work, and like building a school, building the medical
Wonderful.
clinic, building the hydroelectric, the water system, et cetera. So
It's wonderful. And part of your experiences has been about creating community and how important that is,
Yeah.
right? In this part of life.
yeah, very much so. And I've learned so much from the right people of Bassa Village, because community there is so much more integral and organic than what it is in modern life in the U.S. Every villager can recite the genealogy of every family in the village back 5 generations or more. And when someone is ill or injured, the village takes over, just does the housework, does their farming. And they have this, the traditional ethic of welcoming a stranger as a guest. And so they have so much of what we have lost. And so I've, tried to integrate to some degree that value system back into my own life.
I think it's wonderful. And you're spreading these values in your 3rd chapter to so many other people. What a wonderful mission that you have. What a wonderful legacy that you'll be leaving. It's terrific. So admirable.
Well, thank you, Irene. And thank you for the opportunity to spread it.
My pleasure.
We now have Alan Stein presenting his chapter, A Lifetime of Resilience, Renewal, and Reinvention.
Well, thank you for everybody allowing me to be here today and make this presentation. And of course, through me, you're going to learn more about Irene.
If there's a resemblance, Alan is my brother.
So I had the benefit of being the 3rd child. So when I grew up, I was fortunate enough to learn quickly to be an observer and to absorb the things that I saw around me and change my attitudes and responses based upon those things. Irene became such a great orator because she had to entertain the people around her who were emotionally dysfunctional. And in our case, my brother was very rigid and like a tree that doesn't bend in a storm, he basically is broken as an emotional person and gets stuck. And I had the benefit of being very able to adapt to the circumstances that I saw. And in our case, our father was one of 6, 4 of which died before the age of 10. And his parents were very naive and shallow in their view of life and were mad at him when he got polio when he was 6 years old. So they lost 4 children. They had 1 sick child and then they had 1 healthy child, and they favored the healthy child, which created this hostile resentment and anger on the part of our father. And the fact that he had polio, he was disabled with both legs, he had to wear braces, he had aspirations to be a doctor, but he was unable to fulfill his dream because his parents didn't support him. And during that period of life, he became very dependent upon his parents, ended up going into business with his parents, and was always frustrated because he never stepped out on his own and was always angry at them because he didn't take responsibility for himself. And he was too reliant on them and then took out his anger and frustrations upon the people around him. So the fact that he was handicapped was always an issue. He was always a victim. And so for me, as the youngest of 3, I was able to understand and see what I thought were the strong attributes that he brought to the table. He persevered. He was resilient. He got up, he pulled himself together every morning. He struggled physically, but he was able to do what it was that he was in a position to do, even though he wanted to do so much more. He was a smart guy, but he was physically challenged and he was very limited and he was just an angry guy all the time. So for me, the lesson there was never allow anybody to define you. Always pay attention to the circumstances that you're dealing with. Hyper-focus on the positive and compartmentalize the negative, because most people, I would say, not most people, but a significant proportion of the people that I've come across in life allow their traumas to define them, and that they get stuck, whether they're stuck as a teenager emotionally or they're stuck in their mid-20s, or with many of the women that I've met, either they've been raped or they've had bad experiences, and that defines who they are today. In my case, having that type of upbringing, which I wouldn't say was the most desirable upbringing, prepared me for what I eventually had to deal with, which was, I've had 5 different cancers, 8 surgeries, metastatic melanoma, lung cancer, prostate cancer. I've had sepsis. I've had all kinds of physical challenges. And for me, I never got depressed. Whenever I had these issues, I always hyper-focused on my goals and objectives. And in my case, the first serious cancer that I had was melanoma. I was 19 years old, spread to my lymph nodes when I was 26. I was given 15% chance of living 5 years. And when I left the hospital on the way home, as much as I am a logical, pragmatic individual, I had my first spiritual experience sitting in my car at a traffic light, feeling a little sorry for myself, what I had to deal with, and got visited by my 2 dead grandparents, who was the only time I've ever had that experience. And I have no doubt they were there. And the message was, don't worry, you're going to be okay. And never had the experience again. But of course, as Irene got into the spiritual world, was much more receptive to listening to some of the things that she was experiencing, especially, once Saul passed away and her development and evolution to where she's now got her podcast and doing the things that she's doing. So for me, the lessons in particular were, don't let other people define you. There's no question as we age in our culture, in this country, it's unfortunate, but you do get aged out. The young people don't have the connection that they do in other cultures. They don't respect age. They want to push age aside. They want to be able to replace you, and you become irrelevant, which is very unfortunate in our society, but it's something that seems to have become more and more prevalent. But in order for me, with each of these, I could never really confide in anybody about my illnesses, because I could never really feel that if I told them, they would then support me in the businesses and the circumstances that I was in. I basically worked for an insurance company for 8 years. And when I saw the limitations that would be imposed upon me because of my health, I branched out on my own, created some products, created my own insurance agency, and continued to develop different products for like over 30 years. Subsequently got into mergers and acquisitions. I formed 2 new companies last year having to do with Amazon. I'm a consultant for Amazon, and we do trading on Amazon. So the big things, though, for me, if there were lessons in life, it's about being able to focus on the positive, trying to really compartmentalize the negative. Don't allow other people to drag you down. It's really important to avoid being depressed, because it's easy to get depressed. There's so many people in life who are dealing with stuff where the emotions overwhelm them, and they don't have the ability to focus on where I'm going. They get stuck in where I've been. And a lot of times where I've been defines who they are, and then they can't move forward. And with that, I'll just read you a quick excerpt of the conclusion of my chapter, which kind of summarizes what I've been saying. Although this is the 3rd phase of life, it's my umpteenth time to start again. Having a daily objective with purpose, a focus on business and social activities that are mentally stimulating, surrounded by a professional and social network of intelligent, vibrant individuals seeking knowledge and enlightenment. I have no time to feel old, tired, non-productive, and without purpose. That's not my chosen path. In spite of and while enduring the multiple health challenges through the chronology of surgeries and cancers, I've founded a religious organization. I was a city commissioner, and I kept my health issues confidential so those narrow-minded individuals in power would not think to stop my progress, because they might speculate that I get sick on the job. I live my life with gratitude, purpose, and positivity and joy, constantly seeking to learn new things, to stay mentally active and live responsibly, because I know how lucky I am. I don't have the time, inclination, or desire to be a victim, and refuse to dwell in the past, to make excuses for why I didn't make other choices. Life is a gift to be enjoyed as best as your individual circumstances allow. I will always live with the knowledge that it can be taken away at any moment.
Thank you. And you are a gift for me.
So to conclude our contributor spotlight, we now have Brian Smith presenting his chapter From Personal Tragedy to Public Triumph, the Creation of Grief to Growth. Take it away, Brian.
Thanks for having me. First, I want to say that I'm honored to be included with everyone here. Irene, thanks for letting me do this. I feel kind of overwhelmed by listening to everybody's stories, and it's tough to follow. It's a tough act to follow all you guys. But in terms of my story, we talked about reinventing ourselves, and I think I've had about 8 different jobs now. And I guess I would call it maybe 4 different careers. I started off as a chemical engineer, worked for IBM in marketing, sold large systems there, worked for a bunch of smaller resellers, started my own retail business 22 years ago this month, and then started Grief to Growth about 4 or 5 years ago after the passing of my daughter, Shayna, who passed away in June of 2015. But I like what Betty said about it's not so much about what we do, is more about who we are, who we want to be. And so when we talk about reinventing ourselves, we often talk about our careers and the things we do to make money. But for me, it's much, much more than that. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian home. I had a big fear of God. I was, kind of in a religious box, I would say, at this point. And when I think of how far I've come spiritually, it's just like it's night and day. It's really been an amazing journey, spurred by all these different things that have gone on in my life. And one of my favorite quotes is about Kierkegaard, about how life has to be lived forward, but can only be understood backward. And one of the great joys about getting older is that you get more perspective on life. You can see these things that we thought were tragedies, the things we thought were the end of the road, the roadblocks that we could never get over, were actually opportunities to kind of guide us maybe in a different direction. And I think about back to the first time that I was fired from a job. Could have been fired a couple of times, but the first time I was fired from a job, I was very upset. My daughter was 9 months old. My wife was staying at home. We just bought our first house, and here I am without a job. And I look back on it now, 28 years later, 27 years later, because Kayla will be 28 in November. And I realized that was an opportunity for me. It forced me from something that I was just kind of like going along and not really doing that great in the job I was in, but it was working for a big company. It was stable. It forced me to do something different. So now what I do with people is try to help people to reframe, to understand as we're going through these things, if we can, what can we do with this? How can we take this? How can we use it to transform something? And so again, when Shayna passed away 9 years ago next month, which is hard to believe, I never imagined that I would even be still on the planet at this time, let alone that I'd be doing what I am doing, because I didn't really want to be here. But it presented another opportunity to me. And I found organizations like Helping Parents Heal, which I know some of you guys are familiar with. I'm now on the board of Helping Parents Heal. Again, never thought I'd be doing that, but working with parents who have lost children to help them understand that, our life does continue, but not just with, in spite of our children, but with our children. My daughter is part of everything I do, which is why she's my background. My daughter's behind me, as I speak to you guys today, because Shayna's with me all the time. And because of people like Irene and other people that are putting out this material, I've learned so much in the last 9 years. I mean, more in the last 9 years than I learned in the previous 54 years before that. So as Irene asked me to write the chapter, I was 62 years old. I just turned 63 on Sunday. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I am in the latter phase of my life, but only in terms of this particular chapter of our life, because even this entire thing that we call a life is just a chapter. It's just a chapter in a much, much larger picture. So as I approach the end of what we call this life, and sometimes people, as we get to the end, we think, oh man, I've got all this wisdom now, and it's being wasted because I'm coming to the end. And I like to. No, we take all this with us. We take the wisdom with us. We take the love with us. Nothing that we do here is wasted. So I I'm really focused on the next however many years it is still continuing to be creative. I love to create. So I do have the podcast. I've written only one book, nothing compared to what Phyllis has done. I don't even know if I'll get to two, but I've written one book and I produce a podcast every week. I produce, I have a YouTube channel, and it's really great to be able to do things to touch people and to be able to have these opportunities to speak to people and to share with them the wisdom that I've gained over the years. And my grandmother, I remember my grandmother, I grew up with my grandmother in the house. And I remember being 16 years old, and she was probably only in her late 60s, but she seemed like she was 150 to me. And she told me that, I still feel the same today as I did when I was 16. And I couldn't understand that when I was 16, because I thought old people are they're different. They've always been old, and and so I'm at that part of my life now. It's like, no, I understand what she meant. I still have the same spirit I had when I was a 16-year-old kid. I still have the same likes and desires, some of the same fears even, but I do have more wisdom to go along with it. And I'm really happy to have this opportunity to be able to share a little bit of that with people. And I think this book is a great project because, as someone was saying earlier, we really don't respect age much in this country. We are such a youth-oriented culture. We're like, let's stay young, let's be young, let's only look at young people. Young is where it's at. But with youth, we don't have the experience. With youth, we don't have the wisdom that everybody here on this panel and everybody that's contributed to this book has. So I hope that people will pick this up and get some of the wisdom that I was able to get from the fact that my grandmother lived with me. She lived with me for, I guess we lived together for about 8 years. And that was a real blessing for me that a lot of people don't have. So with that, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna read a little bit from my chapter. I'm going to read from the beginning of my chapter. And what I said is, as I stand on retirement's doorstep, I can't but help and reflect on the wisdom of Kierkegaard, who once said life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forward. It's funny how as we accumulate more life experiences, we get more candles on our birthday cakes. The pieces of the puzzle pieces of our existence start to fall into place. Some might say it all finally makes sense when we're nearing the finish line, as if that wisdom is lost when we cross the line, but I know better. I see the death of my physical body as the start of a thrilling new chapter in a never-ending story. I actually look forward to death. I know some people find that morose, but I'm looking forward to that new chapter. At the advanced age of 63 now, I was 62 when I wrote this, I've held down 8 professional gigs since my high school days, navigating through 4 distinct careers. I've danced with divorce. I've been shown the door by employers twice. I've had my heart shattered by the loss of my beloved daughter, Shayna. And back then, none of these things made any sense to me. But as Kierkegaard predicted, life's river of time keeps flowing, and with it comes a deeper understanding. I've discovered that the most profound meaning often emerges from the most challenging chapters of my life. I didn't just endure those adversities, they sculpted me into who I am today. Without them, I would be less, and I will say that I'm grateful for everything that's happened to me, regardless of how bad it looked at the time. So with that, thank you for having me.
Brian, you're so eloquent and articulate, and your story's just wonderful. Talk about having a wonderful third chapter. I'm kind of glad that ours are on parallel paths in certain ways, and it's such a blessing. And I really want to thank each one of you, because each of you are a blessing in my life. And I'm so grateful that you are participating in this wonderful project, because I really think that we are going to uplift, enlighten, and empower many people with this book. So to celebrate the launch of Fruit to the Last Drop, we are going to give away 50 free copies to enthusiastic readers who are willing to leave an honest review on Amazon after reading. Entering is going to be really easy, so I want everyone listening to this launch to fill out the form that is linked in our show notes, which will allow us to contact you if you're one of the lucky winners. And then once you've entered, you're in the running. We'll select the first 50 entries as the winners, so don't wait. And if you're selected, we'll ship you a free copy of Good to the Last Drop straight to you. Dive in, enjoy the read, and then head right over to Amazon to share your thoughts with a review. And I would like to encourage you, because the giveaway ends soon, to hurry. Don't miss the chance to get your hands on this free copy of Good to the Last Drop and share it with your feedback on Amazon. Thank you, thank you, thank you to each of you wonderful contributors to this new book, Good to the Last Drop, Embracing Your Life's Third Chapter, and to you, all the cherished members of the Grief and Rebirth podcast audience, for your love and your support. Enjoy the read, and as I like to say, to be continued, many blessings, and bye for now.